It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. First, we have Herman Weiss, MD, MBA. He is the practitioner in residence for the MS in Biotechnology Management and Entrepreneurship program at Yeshiva University. Currently, Dr. Weiss is VP of Clinical Development and Medical Affairs at Juniper Pharmaceuticals in Boston, Massachusetts. He has worked as a co-founder and chief medical officer of a medical device startup and has been active in the biotechnology startup scene for years. And second, joining us as well today is Frederick Larcombe, CPA. He has extensive experience as CFO for life science companies, working on drug delivery, pharma development, agritech, and diagnostic testing products, among others. He has been involved in all aspects of raising capital, credit facility negotiation, mergers and acquisitions, operational management, and strategic planning and analysis. So welcome, Herman and Frederick. And I believe Herman will be starting off today, so take it away.
All right. And Herm, have you covered everything you want to cover?
No, not yet. I just wanted to, I just wanted to touch base and say, not only are we seeing a excitement on the academic and the educational, it's really important to note that big pharma and big biotech companies are looking at the small not want to say mom and pop, but on the small startups for a lot of their innovation. They'd rather pay more later on down the road and get a more assured success, as opposed to many shots on goal and most of them fail. If you realize that 95 to 97% of all drugs in development will not be launched. They'll fail in some, whether it's efficacy or safety. And so big pharma is really pulling back and not investing on early stages. They're waiting for a biotech company to take an idea, nurture it, bring it along, baby it to each of the milestones, and pay a premium, but at a later stage. So a lot of the large companies are, indeed reducing their R&D dollars and buying later stage companies, and it's beneficial to the startup companies because obviously they have a better exit. The problem is it takes effort, it takes capital, it takes a lot of strategic know-how to bring those concepts to each milestone. And so if you want to advance the next slide. So what's happening is that this void is being filled by, whether it be universities or in a research institution, hospitals are building their own incubator programs with the thoughts about licensing their technology. And then the entrepreneurs who are either associated with labs or working in the R&D space see concepts that they want to bring on, raise capital themselves and are able to, bring the ideas from, bench to bedside. And there's a lot of work on the way to get there. So you can advance the slide. So once you are working in the space, you'll understand that there's a lot of hurdles that you have to cross as you advance the new technology, be it in pharma, be it in medical device, be it in agritech, clean tech, whatever the case is. You have to understand that what is a good idea today may not be a good idea when you're ready to launch 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. So you have to understand what the current market is, what the current need is, what the price points are now and also in the future, and also what competitors are out there and what competitors are being developed. And is there a technology that's going to make your innovation a moot point in 2, 3 years down the road? You have to understand how to protect it on the patent side, and you have to understand how to get it approved on the regulatory side. So there's so many different hurdles and avenues of development that you need to understand as you're launching the venture. And all these different, bullet points look all fine on the slide, but in reality, each one is a lecture into itself, into a whole course work into itself. So if you take a step back and think about what needs to go into this, I think the first stage that we've decided to talk about today is really the financing and to commercialize these concepts. And how do you raise capital to understand all these different avenues of investigation and these challenges to commercialization? You can advance the next slide. So where do you find your finances? Where do you raise capital from? And there are many, and we're going to dive into this fairly deeply today. Fred, I don't know if you wanted to jump in at this point.
I'd be happy to take it from here. What we're going to do, folks, is talk about each of these sources. They all have pros and cons to them. They're all appropriate for various stages of the commercialization of a project. You don't have to do them all. You can skip some sometimes, or you may progress in a more traditional fashion. But the most important part, the takeaway for this particular webinar here today, is that you have some general familiarity with each of these sources. We've listed them in the typical order that you would access them. And both Herm and I would also be available even after the webinar to answer questions. But I'm going to move through the next maybe 20 slides very quickly, touching the high points of each. And then later in this webinar, Herm and I will respond to any questions you have on any of those topics. And I would encourage you to, after the webinar, to go back here to refer to these slides, keep them as your personal reference, and I think you'll find them useful as you go forward. So jumping right into the sources, we're going to go from the personal resources all the way up to corporate partners. But beginning with the personal resources here, unless you have a winning lottery ticket in your back pocket, you're not going to be financing this all by yourself. And a few recommendations. I don't think you should bet the ranch, all your personal resources, the equity in your home and your 401ks, et cetera. While that would demonstrate commitment, I think the other parties involved with you down the line, venture capitalists or other parties, would probably question you taking that risk and your decisions as a business person. They will want to see that you have some skin in the game, that you do have something to lose, but you don't want to come across as the type who goes to Las Vegas and puts everything on red or black. So next slide here. Your personal resources will typically run out pretty quickly, and you'll have to turn to other sources. Family and friends are the easiest to approach. They're the closest to you, and they're the next natural progression, next in line in the natural progression here. However, it's a dangerous game. They are probably not professionals in nature or maybe experienced in the industry. Think about it. Next Thanksgiving or two, if things aren't going well, what's the conversation going to be like at the Thanksgiving table? Something like that. So family and friends, it can be more emotional than rational. They will, despite all of those downsides, they may be the source of the next $50,000 or $100,000 that you need in the early stage of your enterprise. But nevertheless, there are many downsides, and just be aware of them. Next slide, please. Your typical source would be angels. It's often they are often an excellent source for more than just money. They bring professional management. They bring expertise. They probably have an interest or a knowledge of the field that you're in. That's why they'd be willing to invest money early on. You can access them through alumni associations. Every business school has a function whereby they run fairs, or they run competitions where young upstart companies can make presentations, and in the audience will be angels who can help you get that first foothold that you need. And of course, along the way here, Herm, please feel free to comment at any point in time. Angels are also good too, because they can open the door to the next round of financing. They can bring a little bit of credibility to what you're doing, and demonstrate that you are open to working with professional management. Next slide, please. Typically, that next step would be venture capital. Some people will sarcastically call it vulture capital, but they do provide capital to startup ventures with focus and high growth potential. And if you understand the rules of working with them, they can be excellent sources, again, for more than just money. They will have experience in the industry, and they will be involved with your company. At the very minimum, they're going to be at the board, but they will be involved in other ways as well. Next slide, please. They may choose to install a CEO, a CFO, a VP of technology, or some member of management that they think is critical to the progression of the technology and the business. Typically, though, a founder might be reticent to give up control or share control of their baby, of the company that they've been nurturing. But at the same time, just because they took it from zero to where it is now, they may not be the best person to take it from that early phase and further develop it, commercialize it. For instance, many of the things that we're going to be talking about here later on during this webinar, typically the founder does not have those skills, does not have those areas of expertise. And while they can sometimes rise to the occasion, very often a venture capitalist is not going to take a chance. Just because a scientist, and I'm not minimizing anything here, just because a person has a great technological idea, they may not be well versed in manufacturing. They may not be well versed in dealing with the FDA. They may not be well versed in any number of topics that we're talking about here today. So the venture capitalist is going to minimize their risk by very frequently installing somebody in the business.
Yeah, Fred, just one comment on that. I think that's an excellent point, is that, you know, when you're an entrepreneur, when you're an innovator, when you come to an idea and you're bringing it along, you're babying it, you're nurturing it, you know that idea better than anybody else in the world. That's your baby. But sometimes, you know, you got to bring your baby on and educate in, you know, primary school, secondary school, and college, and you need experts to come and help you, you know, help that idea grow. And these experts are tried and they're true, and they brought other ideas, either similar or not, along. And that's the strategic money that you look for. I think I've seen more ideas, and good ideas, ones that were winning ideas, die at the bedside when the innovator gets caught up and he or she can't divorce themselves from whether it be the CEO position or whatever position it is, that they feel that they know better. And I really think that sometimes, more often than not, that's the death blow, is when the scientist can't step back and say, this is what's best for my child. And I know you've had that, you know, those experiences too. I see it almost daily, really, with you know, scientists that just can't step away, or at least help in different ways.
Yes, I was working with one company about 15 years ago, and the CEO was the scientist, had the technology, and the venture capitalist was willing to finance it to the tune of about 10 million, if I recall correctly, but he wanted to put a CEO into the business. The scientist was resisting it. And I remember one day at the venture capitalist's office, the venture capitalist said, I'm risking $10 million. Do you have demonstrated ability to commercialize products in your background? And the founder said, no. And the venture capitalist said, well, then I'm not going to give you the 10 million. That turned out to be a deal breaker. And
yeah.
So, okay. Well, speaking of risk, let's go to the next slide there. The VCs will also minimize their risk by forming a consortium. Some VCs will take the entire investment on their own. Others will share it with some of other funds that they've worked with before. It's a friendly relationship whereby one VC will take the lead and the others will rely upon the leader. That leader will do a detailed review in terms of the technology, everything that Herm was speaking of before, the viability, the patent position, et cetera, the marketing opportunity, the business plan, and importantly, you and your management team. They are just as interested in your credibility and your abilities as they are of the technology. There's two parts to the equation, the technology and the management. So don't underestimate the emphasis that they will put upon your experiences, your background, and your credibility. And understand, if they are getting involved with you here in terms of demonstrating interest, doing due diligence, working towards a deal, in the back of their mind, they're also going to have an exit plan from the very start. And that's something which you also need to have a dialogue with them about in terms of what are they thinking of in the way of an exit, and generally when. Generally, is it 5 years? Is it 3 years? Is it 7 years? Things like that. We'll talk a little more about that. Next slide, please. When they are doing their due diligence, they're going to develop a valuation. They're going to look to various sources, various reference materials. Your cash flows will need to stand up to scrutiny and be realistic, but at the same time, that is not the only thing they're going to look at. Yes, they want to see that you're optimistic and that there's a bit of a hockey stick there, but don't, what's the phrase I'm searching for? They're going to rely upon just that.
Yeah, there's the reality check. If I can tell you how many billion-dollar ideas I've seen and pitched to and had to evaluate, everyone has that billion-dollar idea, and I think you need to have a dose of reality at times, just to, make sure that you understand the market and the opportunity very well. One thing, Fred, that I wanted to preface. One of the most important things when you're really pitching the idea to try to, you have to know, your elevator pitch so well that you know it like better than anybody. And at every level, you're going to be approaching. They want to hear, the like Fred just said, the revenue model. They want to hear that you know that and you got that, at your fingertips, because those are the questions that you're going to be. We always say, yes, you could do something, but should you do that? And sometimes those questions aren't asked. So I think that's critically important, Fred.
I would agree, and understand that when you meet these folks, whether it's in an elevator, literally sometimes, or in their offices or at a cocktail party, you have to hook them in that first 30 seconds. You don't want to mislead them, of course, but you have to be able to provide just enough in what's typically called the elevator speech, in that 30 seconds, let's call it, that you provide enough information about the opportunity that you catch their attention. They have the attention span of a flea only because they see so many, and I don't mean dozens, I mean tens of dozens and hundreds of opportunities on a regular basis. And I would venture to say that that first 30 seconds is whether or not they think it's worthwhile even thinking about or investigating. And during your presentation, you probably have 10 minutes of their time, and they're probably making a decision. I would say maybe in not a decision, a final decision, but at least a really strong preliminary in that first maybe 10 minutes when they're going through the presentations with you. Herm, what would you say upon that topic?
Yeah. I mean, we typically call it the elevator speech because it's what it is. If you can get that hook in with a couple of bullet points just off the top, where the market opportunity, the pathway to approval. I mean, you really are. You want all you want to do from your first meeting is get a second meeting, and so and your knowledge and your expertise will hopefully open that second door. So.
Yep, sounds good. Let's move on to the next slide, please, Valerie. We're not going to spend a lot of time here, but you're going to hear terms pre-money, post-money, and so on and so forth. Here's a very, very simple mathematical model which illustrates each of them. You can Google the terms if you want as well. And let's move on to the next slide here. So the venture capitalists will develop a financing strategy, and they're going to consider many factors here. Keys will be milestones. They may commit to, pick a number, $10 million worth of financing, but it may be they'll give you $2 million to get to a particular milestone, and then maybe $3 million to get to the next one, and so on and so forth. They're not going to write you a check all at once, and they're simply keeping you on a short leash and minimizing their risk, and well, keeping tabs on what's happening. Now, how will they give you the money? It varies depending upon the circumstances, but let's go to the next slide here. It could come to you in any number of ways: common stock, preferred stock, or notes payable. Most commonly, I would say venture capital will give you preferred stock, and it'll have a stated dividend rate, which that amount keeps accumulating quietly, and they will have an option to convert both the original investment plus the accrued dividend into common stock under certain conditions, i.e. when you have a fundamental transaction where you're selling the business or the technology, etc., or if they need voting opportunities, or maybe the preferred stock might even have the voting feature embedded in it. We could spend an entire seminar on just these 3 bullet points, but it's important for you to be at least aware of preferred stock as probably being the most popular route that you'll be receiving money. Let's move on to the next slide, please. We talked about the lead before. The lead, just as an example, might provide maybe half the financing and farm the other and syndicate the other portions out to their affiliated firms that they're friendly with. They do it to minimize risk, but typically your lead will be the party that you're dealing with. Not at all times, but typically that you're dealing with. They might appoint the board observer. They'll be the one who'll be closely monitoring you, etc. Next slide, please. The financing will probably come in pieces, as I just mentioned before. The amounts and the times are going to be agreed upon up front. You have to hit your milestones, otherwise they're going to get very involved. They're going to get very involved in your day-to-day business and start watching you very closely. The best way to work with the venture capitalist is to deliver upon what you promise. And of course, your projections and all, you want to build in a little bit of cushion, but they're going to be wise to the nature of the industry and your activities. They're going to push back and try to eliminate as much cushion as possible. But nevertheless, at the end of the game, you have to be confident that you can deliver upon what you promise. Okay, next slide.
Yeah, just to put an exclamation point there. It's so critical that you are able to craft your goals as smart goals and smart milestones, so that you're able to achievable and meaningful. And I don't think that can be undersaid how important that is when you're making these deals and when you're going forward. That don't reach for the sky when, you know, it's great, but that's a dream. Do something that you could reach, get your next milestone, get your tranche of money, and then and move on. Don't reach for too much.
Okay, and then looking at the next slide, I'm going to speed up a little bit here because we're a half hour in here, and we want to allow plenty of time for Q&A. Just as a bit of background, venture capitalists or any other parties might have more than one fund. Typically, where the fund is in its life cycle, you need to know that. They will probably only put you into, or rather a fund, they'll take the money out of a relatively young fund, because each fund, and I'll spend just 30 seconds on this, has a typical life cycle. The first year or two, they're making investments with the money. The second and third and fourth year, they're maybe making some additional follow-on investments. They're helping to get the companies going and achieve success. And maybe the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh year of a fund cycle, they will be selling off the companies, taking their money off the table, and then ultimately returning it to those original investors in the fund. So be aware of that. It doesn't really, you don't have a choice typically of what fund comes your way, where the money comes from, but typically the fund will have a focus. If you're in drug development, you'll get a fund that probably is focused on drug development. Basically, you'll see alignment along those lines. Let's move on. We can talk about funds later on if there's any questions. Here, one of the last, this is probably, if I were to highlight 3 or 4 or 5 slides that are absolutely critical, this is one of them. When you take the money, and this is where an attorney is going to be critical, and financial advisory, you must clearly, and let me say that a second time, clearly understand 3 things here. The anti-dilution provisions. In the event of a down round, if you're raising money, say at $1 the first round, and you're not making your milestones and you need more money for that next phase, if you're raising money at, say, less than $1, you're going to be the one that's going to experience the pinch, because the original investor is going to be protected. If they invested at $1 and you're now raising at 75, that 25-cent differential, they're going to be protected. They're going to be able to request additional shares to be issued as if they put in money at 75 cents from the very beginning. And those extra shares don't come out of your next round of investment. It comes out of your pocket. The VC is going to be protected. Again, Google these terms: full ratchet, partial ratchet, down round, anti-dilution. We can spend the entire evening talking about that. Second item, the VC's decisions will be totally unemotional. You're going to be married to your technology, to your baby, as Herm was saying earlier. You will have a lot of emotional attachment. The VC will not. Understand that clearly. And if third point, if things are not going well, they will step in and be very active in the business, trying to salvage their investment. And if they view things are really going down the toilet, they might take an early exit, sell the technology in the condition that it's in, and take it, as I said, an early exit and be gone. Herm, do you have any commentary on those 3 points there?
No, yeah, I think that, again, you know, I'm smirking because I've seen that happen, and you know, it's not fun, it's not friendly, but that's real life, and they have to protect their investment, because the VCs, you know, they have investors themselves, and they have to make their board meetings and present to their investors and make sure that they're following the money, so to speak. So it's not a pleasant day when that happens, but it happens very often.
Okay, next slide, please. We're down to the short straws here. Other sources: private equity funds, family offices, wealthy individuals. They will generally operate similar to a venture capitalist, but each of them will have their own unique twists and tolerances for risk, different time horizons, or maybe special interests in a particular subject matter. Those features will vary depending upon the equity fund, the family office, and the wealthy individuals. I'm repeating myself a little bit there, but as long as you understand the principles of working with the venture capitalist, the same will apply to any one of these other sources of funds. Next slide, please. Corporate partners. All the large pharmas have quiet divisions which operate like venture funds. They make investments, and they typically want to have the first opportunity when something looks like it's going to be a success. They obviously have very deep pockets, and they can provide instant credibility and fantastic opportunities which are unavailable through other sources. You'd be wonderful. It would be great to say, oh yes, well, Johnson & Johnson is financing my development program here. That would be a great thing to say. It, again, provides credibility when you're dealing with other parties, whether they're helping you with the technology or the getting ready to go to the FDA, et cetera, in any fashion. Understand, though, that the parents can be slow-moving bureaucracies. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is just the last one, grants. They're on the list last, but they're not least. They can provide you with help any step of the way. Sources could be anywhere, could be from Fed, could be from state, could be private sources. I listed the example of the Michael J. Fox Foundation. If you're doing something, for instance, in the area of Parkinson's disease. Overall, though, the grants are typically focused in nature, and because they're coming from the government, do not count upon them to always be there for every phase of your development. Last slide, please.
What? Just yeah. Oh, okay.
Well, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add about the grants. It's similar to a venture fund from a big pharma, which gives you instant credibility. So do grants. Grants tend to have a higher bar from a scientific perspective, and they're not just a ton of shots on goal. They really have a rather rigorous scientific acceptance, where they really put you through the ringer to get those grants. But once you get a grant and are able to use those funds to further development, it's almost instant. What word am I looking for?
It's a good springboard.
Yeah, a good springboard, and that's what other investors, what private investors look for too. So it's something that should always be in the back of your mind as an additional funding source. Yes.
Again, they can happen any step of the way, and yes, I did not mention that they can provide credibility for you, whether you're talking to a venture capitalist or any other party on our list. On the screen that you see right now, 2 points to keep in mind when it comes to grants. Clearly understand and document which entity owns and has the rights to the original technology, any improvements that happen during the grant phase. And last but not least, everything should be memorialized in what's often called CRADAs, basically cooperative research and development agreements. The actual name may vary depending upon whom you're dealing with, but if you're dealing with, say, the military, they will use the term CRADA. Whether you're working with a hospital or a university or a private individual, it can vary tremendously. We're basically at the end of my slides here. Herm, do you want to anything we've talked about so far before we go into our closing remarks?
No, I mean, I think we could open it for questions. I'm happy that we really, we touched on pretty much the major funding sources for innovation, to commercialize. Obviously, a lot of development dollars will be spent. A lot of tears will be shed. A lot of I always look back at that one of the Steve Jobs movies about how many phone calls he had to make before he found an investor when he started Apple Computer in a garage with Steve Wozniak. it's not so easy, this part, but obviously you can't continue without it, and it's most critical. And sometimes it's a matter of just meeting the right person at the right time in the right elevator. And so, you know, but bottom line is you need the tools, you need to have the know-how to have that that pitch, and you have to be comfortable with that, and not only know the science, but know all the aspects around bringing your you know, birthing your baby and bringing him to college, and you know, marrying him off and into the real world. So we're each step of the way, there's going to be I don't want to say hurdles, but there's going to be challenges. Clearly, you're going to need to have some legal advice, whether it be on the patents when you start, whether it be on the documents for the corporate agreements. You know, clearly there are law firms that specialize in this. There are law firms that don't take a premium up front; they take equity. You know, they're also hungry and want to work. So that there are people that will work with startups. Obviously, that there are not everyone could be an expert in the legal side, but you need to have someone who you trust and you can rely on. And there are many different partners out there and available. And then, as you know, Fred and I've mentioned the financial guidance of, you know, what it means to give up equity, when to give up equity, how to give up equity, how to get financed. It's really you have to look at you can't look at individual aspects of this. You have to look at the entire gestalt to succeed. And so I think that this is a good starting point. And a lot of, you know, each one of these aspects we can spend an hour on, even more. But I'm happy that we were able to delve into it at this level. Fred, do you have anything additional?
No. I hope that we've provided a meaningful overview here in the last roughly half hour or a bit more. And to note that we have 20 minutes left to do Q&A. And can we open, Valerie, can we open the phone line, so to speak?
Definitely. As we mentioned in the beginning, the questionnaire box on your control panel is where you can shoot over live questions that we can right now in real time ask our speakers. I know we had a few late joiners, so again, if you missed something, feel free to shoot over that question in that box. I might ask something right now to either speaker. Is there a time when raising money can actually end up can hurt your success?
Herman, do you want to take that one?
Well, I have a few ideas on it. I think if obviously if you need the money and you can't keep the lights on, you know, you always have to take the money wherever it's from. I think that there's sometimes raising money from the wrong people who, you know, we talked about. You have to have a fit with the person who's investing with you, or the company or the group that's investing. And that means that they're not going to wrest control away from you. I think that there's a give and a take. Obviously, if you know, if you're about to announce results of a trial, or you're about to start a trial, or something good's going to happen, and you know it's going to happen, raising money when it's a lesser valuation could hurt you, because then they're investing and the company's going to be worth a lot more in a couple months. So if you can wait it out, maybe that would be beneficial. But I think that it's very important to know that when you raise money, it's preferable to have smart money than dumb money. Dumb money just means someone's coming and writing you a check, which is nice, but the smart money is what helps you achieve your milestones. So, you know, it's a good question. Fred, do you have anything to add?
Yes, in terms of smart money versus just a check, maybe a venture capitalist might offer you a little bit less, whether it's in valuation or in dollars, etc. But if he or she is bringing to the table a board member who has been involved in startup companies and who has seen products being and technologies being commercialized. If that venture capitalist wants to install a VP of technology or a chief science officer who has experience doing exactly what you're planning on trying to do, that might be the better choice. It might be less money. It might be a more of your shares going out to the venture capitalist. But if it gets you over the hurdle, and what do you want? A bigger slice of a small pizza or a smaller slice of a really large pizza? You can do far better with the latter in most circumstances.
Yeah, and to that point, Fred, I've seen, to that analogy, I've seen many people end up with no pizza when they make that wrong decision. So sometimes it's good, sometimes you got to stay alive.
Absolutely, and I see a question coming up here.
Great. Yeah, I was just going to read that off for you.
Please go right ahead.
Awesome. So the question is, if I have an idea, but I don't particularly know angel investors, and what to flesh it out further. So who are potential natural turn to?
I think if you know any good attorneys, this would be a start, and Herm can comment there. They can perhaps put you in touch with some angels, or you can, I would suggest, going to go to the various websites, look up angel funds for Yale, Harvard, in the New York area. They have typically twice a year, those schools, those alumni associations will have events whereby fledgling companies can go and make presentations, and you'll see the angels in the audience. Watch and see how those events go, and you'll have a better idea of the type of questions that will be. You'll have a better idea of how the companies present themselves, and also how the angels react. Or watch Shark Tank.
That's a great last comment. I have 3 words: network, network, network. At these events, you meet people. You meet people in similar spaces. You meet people who are just, people are generally good, I think. I mean, maybe I'm more optimistic than others, and they want to help fledgling ideas and people along, and because everyone wants to say, oh, I gave Steve Jobs his first job. I gave Mark Zuckerberg his first idea, and say I knew him when. And so I would also recommend in our course, we have a lot of mentors, and that's part of actually in our master's program. We have a mentorship program where we have mentors that are not necessarily lecturers, but have been around medical device development, pharma development, and they're just, that's what they're doing now. They just want to help other people along. And so when you have an idea, they may know angels that want to invest. They have a large Rolodex. You want people that have that Rolodex that can introduce you to somebody. If they themselves are not the right person, the next person may be. So I would recommend looking at our program or other programs in the same space that are real, committed to helping fledgling innovators, inventors, entrepreneurs to the next level. I would say on your own, learn as much as you can about the space you're looking to develop. Learn about the competitors. Learn about everything that you can to continue to develop, so that when they ask those questions, they say, "Well, what about such and such?" You could say, "Well, that's irrelevant because of X, Y, or Z." So the more you know, the better it will be for you in the short term, midterm, and long term.
And my opening comment was attorneys that you know, and forgive me, I really should have elaborated upon that. There is probably a handful of attorneys that I've encountered in my entire career that I really respect in terms of where they'll give you 15 minutes of their time, maybe over the phone through an introduction, and they'll listen to what you're thinking of. They'll give you a few observations, and they may say, as Herm says, you know, I know of some people who have invested in that area in the past, or they may say, I don't know of anyone, but here's somebody else that you should talk to. Again, networking, 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 and tell them that I referred you to them, and they'll give you 15 minutes and you see if they can help you. So you never know where the next opportunity is. And of course, these parties, the attorneys and everyone else, they're interested. They don't want to waste their time or money. They would hope that you would sign on with them from a long-term point of view, and that they would help you take flight and soar through the skies. And you know, they'd be right along with you there.
Amazing. It looks like we have time for just one more question. So let me just take a look here. To be successful in this space, I surely need to be a self-starter. What are some good ways to mold myself to be a successful entrepreneur and continue to stay aggressive?
So I think Fred, your last comment about watching Shark Tank. I think there's so much you could learn about who's a good presenter, who's not a good presenter. You have to know your space. You have to just always be learning, always be thinking, always be reading, and networking, and just meeting people. You know, if you can just, you know, shadow someone for a couple months, you know, just another plug for our program. We have an internship program with some, you know, startup companies that you'll be able to learn what it means to be an entrepreneur if you're unsure. You know, it's not easy, but you know, there's so much that you can accomplish and learn on your own that you may need to be mentored.